Cloud. All right, good afternoon, or whenever you're watching the YouTube video it is. I hope it's a good one. My name is Brian Lenz, and we are here for a two-part series of implementing blended learning at your site. And with me today is
Tambry Tondrick. I'm the Executive Director of Operations from Beacon Academy of Nevada. So welcome to our presentation. Today we're going to discuss blended learning, implementing blended learning in your schools, and we're going to focus on program design, content, and teaching. There is a guide that we highly recommend from Keeping Pace with Digital Learning Report, and there is a link on this slide as well. And the guide outlines the major strategic planning issues and key questions around 4 categories: digital content, teaching, operations, and technology. And it is a very large and important topic when you're thinking about implementing blended learning in a school. And so tonight we're just going to focus on digital content and teaching. If you enjoy this presentation and you want to learn more, next month in May, we will be focusing on operations and technology. So when you think about program design and defining blended learning really takes the best components of your face-to-face classroom and your best components of teaching online, and you build a hybrid. You combine both of those strategies, those best practices, and you incorporate them into a classroom. We will also mention, in addition to just incorporating into your classroom, because there are school administrators that are thinking on a larger scale of incorporating or implementing blended learning across their campus. They may be thinking about putting it in a specific program, such as you've got a really great math program, so you would like your math team to incorporate blended learning across the whole department. And so we will talk about different strategies or different uses for blended learning. And Brian and I, we do put up our email addresses for a reason, so that you can reach out if you need help with any of this. I am the executive director of a charter school that is blended learning. All of our curriculum is online, and all of our students do come in face-to-face. We, through the pandemic, it really only emphasized how important the face-to-face component for online instruction is. Our students did not do as well. They definitely, just like all schools, we are experiencing learning loss and working to overcome those challenges and the school anxiety of getting students back in the classroom. But really what we want to focus on is, how do you bring blended learning into your school, into your department, or into your classroom? And so sometimes this is your decision, and sometimes it's made at the school level or at the district level. But what is it you're able to control within these digital learning models? A blended program, 5 days a week, face-to-face, digital component, a hybrid, split schedules, some days at school, others at home. That's my school. And then online is completely online, distance. Those are your schools like Connections Academy, Nevada Virtual Academy, Nevada Learning Academy, where the students are 100% online. And so you have different types of models that you could, if you were thinking about doing it, there are schools that are using all of these models that you could go learn from and see in action as well, which I'd highly recommend to get an idea of the structure, the expectations that that teachers have, but also at the school level, the parents, the students, all of those components come into making these rather large decisions.
Yeah, one thing that I'd point out here is we talked about blended learning being the best of face-to-face and virtual. Hybrid really becomes the best of fully online and face-to-face as well, because it provides flexibility for the students and for teachers, but also provides that structure that some of the students need, that may struggle in a fully online, and they still have that physical connection to the teacher, to the school, to some routine, but then get that flexibility on days where they're working online. Oops.
Yeah, so what I'd like to, I'm going to start with the hybrid model. Brian was just speaking about the hybrid model. And as I mentioned, this is a program that we follow. And if I'm not mistaken, Odyssey, which is a CCSD charter school, also follows the hybrid model. And what you're looking at here is when the students aren't on campus, they can access their courses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can complete their classes. What we find in a hybrid model is the students are oftentimes pretty comfortable completing their electives on their own, and they can complete some of their assignments. And then they may get to points in their class where they really need that help. So when they come into the school, they've reached a point where they need that support and intervention, and that's where the teachers are providing that face-to-face instruction. And the big difference between what you typically see in a classroom and like a traditional classroom versus a hybrid classroom is you may have 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 students in your class, and they may be in 10, 20 or 30 different places in the curriculum. And so you can provide front loading, letting everybody know how to complete an assignment that is within a particular lesson. More to what we do is we group students based on where they are in the course. And if you train your staff to use the data that's provided in the learning management system in their courses, they're going to be able to see where the students are in the course. They can see where they've submitted their work. They can look at the grades that they have. What do they need to reteach? So that face-to-face part is critical to provide really personalized learning to help that child or that student overcome that obstacle. Maybe it's a gap in their education, maybe it's new curriculum, but that's where the instruction comes in. And it's very, very relevant for the student because it's being provided when they need it. And so they're much more engaged. Some other models, the rotation model, if you, I think elementary teachers do this one really well. And when I've gone into schools and observed it, it's great to see the engagement level of the students. But I'll give an example of what I've observed, but you can take this and use it 100 different ways, right? But there's the teacher, and maybe the teacher is at a station where they're working, let's just say it's a reading, something on reading. So the students sit with the teacher and they're reading, or they are completing an activity with the teacher where it can be, she may or he may have them grouped by level, or maybe it's just mixed groupings. But when the students aren't with the teacher, they may be at another station with manipulatives, something hands-on, some type of activity, and then a third station where they're on a computer, depending on the amount of technology in the classroom, the number of students, and the different varying levels of the students within the class. I've observed many classes, students are engaged, on task, and it is a really, really rich way to lead a blended class. And the flipped classroom model does have a great usage in that the students are home or in the classroom. but most of the time the online instruction is done at home. They're watching a video, they're maybe participating in an activity that the teacher assigned, going through different websites, and they learn the material that way. And then when they come into class, it's those larger classroom activities. So think of a science class. If you have an activity in your class, it's going to take multiple days and you don't have the time, to provide that instruction, or you want the students to come in ready to go, that the students can access that material online and then they come to class and they're prepared. In those situations, you do need to know your students and recognize that some of the students may not always do what they're supposed to at home, so have a plan in place for those students. But if they see that the other students walk in and can do activities, it may increase that engagement in online instruction from home. So I don't know, Brian, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting, especially Flip. That's really the crux is, how do I get them to actually do it? And so that's a lot of the questions that we get. And some of the things that I've heard is, number one, you need to stick with it, right? I gave up on it too early when I taught high school because it was too frustrating for me, because 25% would tell me they didn't do it, but really there was probably closer to 60% that actually weren't doing it. Some of them were just trying to fake it till they made it. But I gave up too fast, so that's one. And then in the beginning, when you're trying it, instead of going right into individualized activities, having some sort of reward structure in place for the students that are able to engage and answer questions correctly based on what they were supposed to learn, helps that positive reinforcement right off the get-go. Like, hey, if I do this, good things are going to happen, right? Planning fun activities then that, hey, if like a Kahoot or an opening quiz, that based on those results, they get to maybe more choice in the type of activity they do next. Those little things that can be really powerful in the beginning of the year in cementing those behaviors and those habits that we want our students to do. And then the other thing too is teachers don't have to just pick one of these models. I worked with a teacher who loved using rotation model for her literacy blocks, but used the flip model for her math, because kids were able to engage at that, the content for math, and then come in and do the practice with the teacher. But with rotation models, being teacher focused in small group, being able to do the phonetics and things like that with the littles was really important to her. And so that is a possibility too with inside the classroom. And so then one of the things too, when we start talking about program design, you really want to nail down a vision for your program, not just, hey, this is what Blended is and this is what we can do and how we can deploy it, but what's the point? What's the purpose? And what's our overall goal? And one of the reasons that pandemic teaching was really tough is the relationship piece just wasn't there. Cameras were off. We tried to take brick and mortar schedules, throw them online, and it just didn't work. We didn't make enough adjustments to the modality of teaching. And so it fell flat on its face, right? It's like trying to use a chainsaw without cutting it down and then saying the chainsaw's, or without turning it on and then saying the chainsaw is broken, right? You're still may be able to cut down that tree and some great things are gonna happen, but those teachers had to work really, really, really hard to get it to fall. And so when you start talking about blended learning, we want to make sure that everything we do is around the student-teacher relationship. That's the center of all of it. And so when that is strong, we can then talk about the other 4 components that we like to look at. First, at the very top, the true north of this is our individualized instruction for students. That's what makes this whole thing powerful. What we're able to do through that then is make sure that we have authentic assessment, which has to be tied to that individual instruction, and we have to be able to pull data from as well, from those assessments. And then we have to partner with digital content. So all of these things need to be related to one another, which is why I really love this graphic. It's showing how they're all interwoven together. The authentic assessment you have to know your kids to know how this is going to connect to their worlds. The example that I always like to talk about is I was big on talking about skateboarding because I thought I was a really hip, cool teacher. But when I started talking in small groups and now I got 3 or 4 softball players in front of me, talking about skateboarding wasn't relevant to them. It really wasn't authentic. It didn't connect with them. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about data analysis in a little bit, but making sure that it's not just the data from those big standardized tests. As Tammy talked about, there's data in the platforms. There's informal data that we can pull on a daily basis. All of those data points need to be considered if we're truly going to individualize the instruction for our students. And then to free us up as teachers, because there is only so many instructional minutes in a day, we have to partner with digital content. We have to release a little bit of that control, allow digital content to teach the knowledge and understanding type level and introduce concepts that way. And then we as the teacher are able to spend more time making sure that the individualized instruction, small groups and things like that are really, really relevant to what the student needs. All right. And then the other thing to consider is not everyone's going to jump up for joy and say, yeah, let's change the way we do things. And so having a realistic approach to where your staff is at is really important. And so this graph is the basic breakdown of how people change is entire groups. And so when you start looking at your entire staff, you probably already know who those innovators are, that no matter what you want to do that's brand new and it's out of the box, they're ready to go. Yeah, let's try it. Sounds great. I love it. Let's go. And then you have the early adopters that just let me see how that goes. And then I'm ready to go. Let me make sure that some of the initial bugs are taken care of. And then the early majority are, okay, yeah, it's working well for these. Let's jump in and get rolling. And then after that half has been taken care of, you can start getting the other half with the late majority that are just a little bit hesitant. And then your laggards are the ones that are like, well, this will just pass. This change will pass. I'll wait until the next principal comes in, the next whatever the next phase is. That's that mentality. If you think about it, these are the innovators are the ones that wait in line for the new iPhone. The early adopters are the ones that always have the best new iPhone, but I'll wait till the lines die down. The early majority are like, I'm just maybe one model behind. The late majority are still here. And, I'll wait till my phone stops updating. And then your laggards are the ones that have flip phones, right? They're just like, I don't even need a smartphone. And that's where you're at. And when you're designing a program, typically the innovators and early adopters tend to be our teacher leaders. But it's really important that we get the opinions and the pushback early on from members throughout all these groups. So when you're designing your program, pulling some of those teachers in just to say, hey, this is what we're thinking, hearing what they're going to say and the pushback and those things up front can help you plan your professional learning so it's more targeted. So you can say, all right, well, I can nip this in the bud right away. Here's how we're going to handle all the naysayers as this starts to roll out.
So Brian, that's interesting. And we had a similar experience here at my school. When I first came over, it was fully online. And so it was structured that the students were fully online, but they weren't quite alternative ed at the time, but the school was serving an at-risk population. And so through a variety of, when you do all of your needs assessments and you put together your school performance plan, it kept coming up, it's difficult, the students aren't attending regularly. What are some interventions that we can do? And so with those interventions came up, well, we should have the students on campus more. And so we were able to get staff buy-in because it was identified through the needs assessment that these were some things that we needed to do. And so we came up with structure and we kept growing it and growing it. So it started out as kind of a volunteer program, and then it became more of, you're not doing well, we need you to come into school. And then it was a rollout. And it did take some time, and we had a lot of buy-in. And then we ended up having a lot of data supporting that the direction we were moving the students, we were seeing, I mean, it was clear students who came to school for the interventions and support did better than those that work from home. And so by using all of the resources that you have available to you, we did do this rollout. It isn't overnight though. Like you said, it's a multiple year decision when you're doing something like this, so that you can get the early majority and the late majority just on board fairly quickly, because they will see results.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so next we're going to start talking about digital content. And so when we start looking at this, again, there's the link to this guide. There's specific guidance and additional questions considered inside this guide that's really, really strong. And so the first thing that we want to take a look at is, what's the difference between like content and tools? And a simplified way to kind of view it is, content has stuff, activities, learning already embedded in it. And tools typically come empty or require a teacher to input the questions or the content themselves. So when you think of like Canvas by itself, the shell, the course comes empty. But if you were to look at like Freckle, that is content and practice questions already developed for the teacher just to deploy with their students. Now, some of the digital tools have gotten hip that teachers don't have a lot of time in their lives, and so they may have repositories of content. But again, that's where it kind of gets blurry. But by default, they come empty, and teachers have to put it in or borrow from those repositories. So just keeping that in mind is really important. And again, the role of content is really there to help the teacher free up some of the instructional minutes so that they can spend more time on the teaching and learning process instead of just having to lecture, especially at the DOK level 1 and 2 type areas. But it's also important to note that not all content is created equal. And so different pieces of content serve different roles. And so how that partnership looks as a teacher is going to be dependent on which content you're deploying at the time. Now, in an ideal world, you'd have, something from maybe each one of these buckets, or maybe just supplemental and adaptive, depending on your deployments. But if you're looking at what that does as a teacher when you're planning, so I always like to think, what's the tech doing? What's the student doing? What's the teacher doing? And if you focus on those three things as your lesson planning, then putting in the technology here, I'm going to use the supplemental, which is skill and practice, right? Like something like Freckle. Here's the questions. You're just going to get on there, skill and drill some of these math things. The teacher then still needs to make sure everything else is being covered in that instance, right? How did I scaffold the students to set them up for success? How am I going to extend the kids? How am I teaching them at grade level? So maybe they're going to watch these instructional videos at home, the flipped classroom. I'm going to open up the classroom with a 5-minute direct instruction lesson, and then I'm going to pull small groups to do additional scaffolding and extension for my high kids and low kids as needed. If you have an adaptive software, something that is able to analyze the response of the students and then put them on their own unique paths, now the teacher needs to focus on grade level, because that digital content is able to go down and say, hey, you don't understand these concepts yet, let's build you up and go from there. So if you have something like that, that's fantastic. Go do that. Now, as a teacher, we're at grade level, because that's the other thing that we want to make sure that we're doing as an instructor is making sure that we're giving the student a complete package. If we're always going down and saying, well, my students aren't ready for this, I need to teach these, and they never getting any exposure to at grade level things, those students are just going to be behind all the way through their career. And so then we're not leveraging technology in this modality of teaching to the best of its power. And then courseware is something like Apex, right? That has an entire course. It can issue credit from, it's approved at the state level. Those type of things are an example. Edgenuity is another one. There's a lot of providers that the state has approved. Beacon Academy, they have courses that are approved. The teacher's role here then becomes more of a facilitator. Now, again, the key here is do not remove yourself from the classroom. That does not mean that you're just sitting at your computer and saying, everything's due Friday, everything's due Friday. You know, you really want to be a coach. You're still opening up class, you're still closing class, you're providing the scaffolds as needed, you're enriching that courseware as best that you can. Teaching science, right? I know I want to incorporate some hands-on things. When I taught fully online, I knew for AP Bio, I had to bring those kids into campus. So I gave up some of my Saturdays. The kids came onto campus. We broke out the labs and we did 3 or 4 labs on Saturdays throughout the year. That was something that I knew they needed. So while yes, I could issue the credit right from the course, that was something that was absolutely needed. I also hosted weekly webinars, right, and live sessions. Those became my engagement centers. How can I get these students talking with one another? How can I build excitement in the classroom? So again, don't let yourself be a stranger and just a grader and a taskmaster. You want to make sure that you're actually facilitating and supporting learning. And then Tammy, you want to talk a little bit more about where they can get content?
That's the $1 million question, right, Brian? Oh, you know, you have to look at your budget and you have to look at your school needs. So what are your trouble spots? When I first came to Beacon again, we were a school that was using something like 6 different content providers, 2 different LMSs. It was very difficult for the students to navigate. So first consideration is are you doing this as a school or a class or a department? If you're using it as a school, it's really important that all of your classes have the same look, feel, and navigation. So in that case, the state has bought Canvas, which is what we use, which is what the universities are using. And so Canvas, though, doesn't have any content. So we've had enough time now where we have completely built our own curriculum other than math. In math, we use an artificial intelligence program like you were talking about. It's adaptive to the learner, and it works fantastic for our population. So there are so many considerations to look at. So I'm going to talk about it more, I think, from a teaching perspective, the teacher in the classroom. Do you have a budget? Has your administration given you any money to spend? If so, then you should have a team that gets together. And I think Brian and I served on a team like this a million years ago, where we were evaluating online content. And we developed a rubric and we went through and we discussed, and we spent a lot of time on the navigation of it. How long does it take a page to load? Like very user-friendly questions, because when you think of your students, they're gonna get frustrated if they cannot get their lesson to open. If it has 15 pages and it takes over a minute for each page to open, that student has lost 15 minutes just waiting for pages to open. So how is the navigation? So there are so many different things to think about, but if you have a budget, you team together, develop a rubric, and go through the curriculum, what aligns best with the standards for the state, so the Nevada Academic Content Standards, what meets what, think about your student population. Is it, is it culturally representative of the students that you're serving? Will they understand the material? Will they like it? Will they find it engaging? Just so many things to think about. They are not created equal by any means. And there are so many, just like there are many textbooks. How would your schools select textbooks? And this is the same. You're buying content in a different format. And so I think those are some big questions just to ask yourself first. So, what's the intended purpose, the user, what's your budget? Okay, if your budget is $0, which most of us face most of the time, right? Now you're looking at borrowing open ed resources, OERs. There is a lot of good stuff that is free online. You have to spend time, a lot of time finding it. And again, once you find some, you can typically stay within, like I used K-12 a long time ago when I was developing curriculum, and it really met the needs of about a 8th, 9th grade, which is what I was designing at the time, some curriculum. It really met my needs. And it was open education resource. It didn't have there weren't a lot of copyright restrictions, but again, for your own class, you just look at different things like that. So this is like, I don't know, like a 3-hour discussion in and of itself. And I'm just trying to provide you some guidance just to think about. If you are the teacher building your own curriculum, love it. It takes a lot of time. If it's something you enjoy, I taught online full time for a while, and I built my own curriculum. And basically I had to set limits for myself. Like I will spend, 2 days of the week building curriculum and 3 days supporting my students. Obviously it wasn't broken out that way, but that is how much time it took. So I would spend 4 to 8 hours building a lesson. So, and my semesters were about 16 weeks long, just like yours are, because you have that intro lesson and you have a final exam. So there's your 16, 17 weeks. And it is a lot of work, but what I had to accept is that it wasn't perfect the first year. I could get the structure. And then the second year, just like when you're teaching your class face to face, like your first year, the first time you're using your lesson, first period of the day looks very different from your 6th period of the day. You get better each time. And so you have to allow yourself that grace to understand that this is where you're starting. It's not exactly where you want it yet, but in order to survive, unless you just really give up any type of work-life balance, which I think we all struggle with at different times, because you really do want to put out a quality product. It's just difficult to get started. I would start with open education resources. If you're designing your own curriculum, borrow as much as you can, and then you supplement the rest by finding great websites. You build great engaging questions, and it does get easier. There's a lot of tools that you can use when building your own curriculum as you develop those skills. I would recommend highly, if you're going to do that, spend some time in professional development and build a template and go from there. So I probably gave way too much information, Brian. Did I miss? What did I miss?
No, I think that was great. I think very realistic on the time, and the professional learning really needs to focus around 2 things as administrator for your staff if they're going to be building and borrowing. First, copyright law. Because we as teachers, we're taught beg, borrow, steal, but now with sharing, and we're protected by fair use as a teacher for our own individual classroom. But as soon as we say, oh, let me just put this in, Canvas Commons, let me share this with the teacher next door, that's not protected under fair use, because now you're distributing. So like, teachers may not be that present of mind and up to date on copyright law. And so having them go through that. And the second is, what's the UDL, right? The Universal Design for Learning. So understanding like why I would use a table or not use a table when I'm designing content. What are those things to make it accessible for everyone? Those are extremely important concepts for designers to know. So if our teachers are going to be designing, I would really focus and provide that kind of professional learning for the staff. That way they know what they need to do to be successful. Because when it's UDL, it really does help with engagement, right? Because it's going to lower the frustration level. Because we're giving kids the internet and asking them to stay focused on their learning. And that's a tough ask. As soon as it's tough and difficult to even understand where they're supposed to click, they're gone. There's a new tab and they're not coming back.
So I think I covered a lot of these questions to ask yourself. I just have looked ahead, and these are conversations that you should be having with your teams. What first of all, what class, what lesson, what content is available. You've got to know your budget. Are you using programs, content with the school? Which courses are available online? Which courses are you offering that don't have curriculum? So oftentimes, if you buy a vendor, let's say an LMS or a content management system, it comes with curriculum. And then you realize, oops, I don't have this class or that class. And that's actually a little easier, because then you can identify what you need. And that may be a really good place to start if you're thinking of doing this as a whole school, so that way you do have time to start making some of your own curriculum. The reason that I say that is cost. Online content is not cheap. And so having some courses of your own can save you quite a bit of money. We chose to do it for a number of reasons. It's very difficult to find a program that is completely aligned to the content standards in your state. And so that's the other hurdle and obstacle. And so that is why blended learning is so important, because you're not going to find a content that is the be all end all, just like you cannot find a textbook that's perfect. And that is the personalization. That's where you bring in your lessons, and that's where you supplement the curriculum. So I know many people will look at a lesson and be like, this is garbage, this is trash. But when you really think about it, it's just missing one or two things, which you can easily supplement, and is a heck of a lot easier than starting from scratch. But those are some choices that you and your teams can make. And then I think, and if there's no curriculum available, I would say start small, start reasonable, start thinking about maybe setting a goal for yourself as a teacher that you'll, create one lesson a week that is a hybrid lesson, or or you may be able to do a little more, or maybe that's even too difficult. So don't be afraid though, give it a try. It really is. It's really, I've always enjoyed designing online. So I would hope that's something you might enjoy too.
Yeah, and then just to piggyback a little bit off that, you talked about teachers going through and evaluating a lesson, right? Whether it's a textbook or that same thing is true with the content, so you can check with your district, check with, if you have a digital department, and CCSD, it's us, it's the online and blended learning department. And we can let you know what's available. what's been purchased district-wide for you to use, the different platforms and things like that. And then as an administrator, though, if there is, something like an Apex or the full courses or something that's already developed, trying to build in time for the teachers to go through and evaluate what's in there. Because really, to have that true partnership, they need to understand what it is. So trying to eliminate the things like, hey, I need you to teach Apex, don't worry, it's all done for you. That's not really helpful to the program, right? It's going to allow that teacher to check out and say, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'm just here to collect my prep buyout and then I'm just posting a grade. That's really not what we want to see and how to be implemented, because then you're not going to be as successful with all the students either. That kind of deployment is only going to work with a highly, highly motivated student. Everyone else is going to fall off because they don't have the supports that they need. All right, so then next we are talking about the teaching component of a blended program. And again, this whole planning with quality playbook, there's a whole section on teaching. So we just got done with the content section. Now we're going to focus in on teaching. And so one of the things that we want to do is, this gives me nightmares back to my undergrad days. But we start talking about Bloom's taxonomy, right? The structure of building knowledge and how we can get to the higher order thinking. In typical instruction, right, traditional, the students come in, the teacher lectures, spends all the time lecturing, then they give them the homework and they send them home to do the creating and the evaluating and the analyzing all by themselves. Or maybe they have to do group work and the students are organizing by themselves, but they're doing that away from the teacher. And the teacher has the expertise of that content. So we really want to flip this. So when we think about Bloom's taxonomy and class time, what we really want to do is spend less of our instructional time as a teacher focused on the remembering and understanding lower level thinking skills of Bloom's taxonomy, and more of our time facilitating the activities that are at the higher end, the analyzing, evaluating, creating. So if they're doing like a project or something that being done in class, you circulating as the teacher, being able to help them problem solve and just giving them those questions to probe what their thinking is. It's going to give you better data to understand what you need to do to close the lesson, and perhaps maybe a mini lesson the next day, because wow, these 4 groups are a little off base. If they're all doing that at home and your check's not till next week, well, it's gone too far, right? Those kids already completed their project. You give them feedback, they may not even take that feedback, right? They're like, well, we're already on this path, I'm done, I'll just get it in, and then you give me my B and we'll be happy. So trying to be more cognizant of how you're spending your time with the students in front of you and maximizing your expertise is, again, one of the huge benefits of using a blended learning approach, because now the higher order thinking is happening in front of you and with you as opposed to apart from you. And then we talk about data informed instruction so much that it's become like almost a joke, right? A buzzword joke. But it's important that we do use this data to inform our decisions. And it's not just those standardized tests, the MAP testing or the end of course, or those quarterly assessments that every platform might have that just kind of reestablishes the pathways for students. But we want to use this on a daily basis. And so there's a lot of different categories where this data can come from. So the formative data just comes like what's happening in the classroom. What are the discussions that you're having? What are they having with each other? You have quizzes that are checked for understandings. The LMS may even have some of those embedded in as well. Where are they at, right? What do they fully understand? The assessment data, that's like your unit test, the MAP data, platform diagnostic tools. All those are important and can help initially set groups, but don't form a group from a data point that was 2 months ago, because that's not an active reflection of where the kid is today. And then you have observational data, right? So just as you're circulating the room, what's going on with the students? Do you notice that these students are completely confused and they're all running to their safety student, right? And asking, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? Right? That those kind of things can help inform that maybe it wasn't as clear as you thought and they just weren't in the mood to ask questions at that point in class. And then Also, just you need to hear from your students. So we talked a lot about the blended learning being centered around relationships. So doing the feedback from the students, how did you like that? What didn't you like? What are you interested in? The career pathway tests. All of those are important pieces of data as a teacher that you could utilize to help inform you on who they are as people and what they are going to be interested in and more likely to engage in, and help you design more engaging learning activities.
So one of the things I think we're all very much aware of from last year is, during the pandemic, our students were really, we were trying to provide the support down in the physiological, the safety, and that love and belonging. So that's where schools have spent, a lot of their time trying to keep those relationships with the students and their families. And now that we have the students back on campus, those I don't think take as much time as they did when we were supporting students completely remotely. And so there is the balance of always the relationships and the learning. And we spent a lot of time, Brian and I just finished it was a five lesson series on the NEPF, where the one thing you always come back to, good teaching is good teaching, and good teaching is based on that rapport that you have with your students. And so you've got to build that rapport, and you've got to have those relationships for the students to really learn from you, and be willing and open their mind, discuss. They've got to feel comfortable enough discussing. They've got to feel comfortable enough to make a mistake. They've got to know that it's okay and that they'll still be accepted, and that. So it's good teaching, practicing, keeping that balance. So if you want to go on to the next slide. So you're building a lesson, keeping in mind that you're trying to build rapport, have relationships with your students. This is all very doable in a blended hybrid program. And so now we're going to talk about the actual lesson itself. And just like in your classroom, when you think about your classroom, your lesson plan, and everything like that, you're building your lesson to follow some type of structure. And the more uniform your curriculum is, the easier it is for your students, because they'll know what to expect. And when designing your lessons, that opening, that hook, that welcome is just as important in online curriculum or content as it is when you're in your classroom face to face. So again, I don't know what model you're using. So your opening could be done face to face. Your opening lesson may be done differently. You may have the opening or the lesson in that flip model done online. So I can't say 100% how you're going to open your lesson, but there should be a hook. It should connect with the students in your class. And again, you have to be culturally sensitive. You have to know who is in your classroom. And so what is that opening? What is your, just like in your classroom, how are you going to engage the students? Sometimes it can be like a video, maybe it's a cartoon, it's an image you've made, but there is something in your lesson that starts it up and gets the students engaged. And then you always have your welcome, your objectives. The students should know what it is they're expected to learn and what they're going to do. Those are the openings. Did I miss anything there, Brian, with that opening?
No, I think that it's really good You know, you talked about it a little bit before, right? Where good teaching is good teaching. And so that welcome needs to be connected to what's going to happen or what happened the day before, right? So just making sure that it's connected to the learning.
And then new content. So just like in your classroom, you've got to connect to prior learning. Looking at online curriculum, that is one piece that I notice is sometimes missing, and it can't be missing. You've got to connect. What did you do yesterday? How do you pull in the last lesson? So there's got to be a connection so that they're ready for that new content. And the beauty of teaching in a blended program and having your content online is if the student didn't get it yesterday, they can go back and listen to it or watch it or review it. And the rest of the class, they don't have that, anxiety of asking a question in class or worried about maybe I'm the only one who didn't get it. Doesn't matter. I don't know exactly what page in the lesson the student's on. And so there is an ability, it's great for different learning levels and different learning styles, because with the curriculum being accessible online, it allows the students to go back and access it. And so your content can be done in a lecture, face-to-face. You can make a video of yourself. You may find a video that you can use that's an open education resource. Textbook, can you refer to different pages in your textbook? Maybe your textbook's online. Are you able to link it? Try to keep those links so that the student just clicks on it and goes right there. Cut down navigation where you can to keep it easy for the student. And then digital, multimedia, interactive. There are many programs that allow you to have interactive buttons. And what that does is that the student then would read like a small section or watch a video, answer a couple questions before going on to the next page. So you're constantly checking for understanding. Practice and digest. There is non-graded, multiple attempts, rapid feedback. There's pros and cons to each of those. Again, we could spend an hour just going over, the way you want to practice and digest, but you'll have to test that out with your student. Multiple attempts works great. Non-graded, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on where it is in the lesson. If it's leading up to an assessment, then that's fine, because it gets the student to see if they're understanding. But they do like, if there's a question and an answer, whether it's graded or not, chances are your students are going to do it, because they're used to answering questions and going to the next page or going in the next level. And then assess, checking for understanding. You can do it page by page. You can do it by project. You can have assessments, but use that data to inform your instruction. Are the students understanding it? Look at it when it's done with your lesson. Where did everyone miss? Is that something that maybe is an adult issue that you can control? Like you can go in and fix a lesson. Maybe you have a wrong answer in there. So it's really important to use that data to inform instruction. Maybe you had all of it. Maybe that concept wasn't explained as thoroughly and you need to add another page to your lesson or something along those lines.
Yeah, and then what I would add is, especially if teachers are building their own, think back to that graphic where we showed everything's interconnected. And so that content has to be connected to what you're doing for assessment. And so even if the temptation's there, like, oh, this is a really cute activity and I'm running out of time, it's 4 o'clock on a Friday, I just want to be done with my lesson so I can enjoy my weekend. I totally understand it. But we don't want to reinforce that this activity is not connected to what I'm going to measure your understanding with at the end, because then students will disengage from, well, why do any of this if the purpose doesn't align to what I need? And so all of those things that whenever you're designing or borrowing, you want to make sure that it is aligned. Otherwise, just cut it. It's better to have it, not have it in there, than to have it in there and then look back and say, well, that was pointless. Because the next time something like that comes up, they're going to skip it. And then when they start skipping content, that's a problem, right? Because that's what we do as humans. It's not a student. It's not a lazy student. Think about you and if you ever took an online course, right? I know if that discussion post is open, I'm not reading chapter 3. I'm reading every one of my classmates' posts and then re-summarizing those, right? Because it's easier, it's faster, and it still gets me to what I need to get to. So students are the same way. So that's just the way it is. So keep that design in mind.
Right, so teaching student engagement, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity are the 4 C's. And these are just, sharing thoughts, questions, ideas, working together, trying to incorporate critical thinking, new ways of linking learning across subjects, and then trying to incorporate creativity, new approaches to get things done. And so these are the discussion questions that you should be thinking about if you are a teacher or an administrator, and you're implementing a blended learning program in your school. We spent a lot of professional development time over the years, and I'm going to say many, many hours each year, just talking about how to build rapport with the students. That is a craft in and of itself when you're teaching online, when you're teaching hybrid, and when you're teaching face-to-face. It's building a rapport with your students, connecting with your students, and then building rapport with others. How do your departments within your groups get along in administration? Professional development can also be done in a hybrid manner. So if you are an administrator thinking of implementing it in your own school, it may be something that you want to model with your staff so that they can experience good online teaching and what they're going to need to do. But also just to help promote it and get more buy-in when they see the different things you can do in a blended learning program. They may be more willing to try it in their own classes if they've experienced it. What are the teacher expectations in your school? And then more administrative questions are, how do you identify staff members to, lead or assist in the transition to a blended or online model? Who are your teachers that really embrace technology, embrace new ideas, like to try new things, get excited about learning new things and trying it and going first. And then the other one is more challenging, is providing that support. So how are you going to support? And it requires a lot of support. It is teaching differently. And so providing the support and the time to get your staff where you need them to be is definitely considerations. And I think Brian and I have mentioned this many times, as we've been doing these webinars now all year, and it does take time, and you need to expect that going in. This is not something that you hear about on Friday and then a month from now you're starting. There's a lot that you do to build up to it. So we just hope to provide you with some thoughts and some ideas, suggestions, and really help you think of how you are going to begin this implementation. And then next month, when you participate, we will go into the next 2 levels, which again are the technology and the operations of it. So more school level implementation. And then we can also address that in the classroom as well, because there's different levels of implementation.
Yeah, and then just to add on to that, when we talk about supporting our teachers, Tammy mentioned this earlier, we just did a whole 5-part series on connecting good blended learning practices to the NEPF. And part of that is like a little measuring, like, hey, an evaluation, right? That could be used by a teacher to self-reflect. How good are you at already doing these things? And that can use that to start identifying what PL do we need to prioritize as a staff? And then the second component, besides just, hey, this is what it should look like, there's some classroom look-fors. So what does it look like if I'm doing really well in blended learning? Those can help drive some of this discussion and support for teachers as well. Like, no, this is really what I want to see when I walk into your classroom and I'm observing a blended lesson. I need to see this, this, and this. I want to see the students doing this, this, and this, and this is how I want to see what's being done on the computer. And then again, Tammy mentioned this before, there is an appropriate time for there not to be any technology out in a blended classroom. So don't hear us and say like the computer should always be open when we're walking in a blended classroom. That's not the case. But the teacher should have a clear identified role that the technology is playing in the lesson. And it may be it's on the sideline this time. And I just need my first graders to practice writing because they need that skill as well. And then we have a bunch of resources through the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative. And so that is up on a website here, the nvdigitallearning.org. A lot of these started spinning up around the times that school closure started happening back in March 2020, and they've continued all the way through to you're seeing this posted, whatever date it says posted on there. It's an ongoing project where there's more and more resources being posted there, for both from a teacher lens, an administrator lens, but also families as well. So it's a great spot to check out as you're doing this when you're looking for what resources are already available to us. And these are Nevada relevant as well. And then Tammy plugged this earlier, but here it is on May 11th from 4 to 5:30. We will be talking about operations and technology as we implement blended learning at our site. And then one last time, there's our contact information. I work with implementing technology in the classroom in Clark County. And thanks for joining.
Thank you.